Why did Secretary McCarthy's failures to communicate the Secretary of Defense's order to the commander, why didn't they immediately deploy forces to the Capitol at 3:04? Why did it take until 5 o'clock, 2 hours? That the DOD Inspector General is complicit in intentionally concealing the Department of Defense actions to delay the National Guard response on January 6th. Wow. It's the first time in 15 years that the agency head have refused to appear publicly for the annual hearing. The DOD Concealed Evidence in their J6 investigations. Shocking, I know. But this is a new report that explains exactly how they did it and why it's so problematic. The report comes from the Oversight Subcommittee. Chairman Loudermilk sent this letter out after he dropped a press release that is going to the Inspector General of the DOD. And remember, the DOD was highly involved in this. We had Mark Milley and Acting Secretary of Defense Christopher Miller, who were telling President Trump that they were going to be there securing the premises at the Capitol. They didn't do that. Trump also wanted National Guard there. That was rejected. And so they said that they did their due diligence and reported everything appropriately. Turns out not true. So we've got that, and they reference this infamous clip from inside the Capitol with Schumer and Nancy Pelosi doing their live action role play of being insurrected. We know that Nancy Pelosi in other videos later said, "I was waiting for this," and then admitted responsibility. But here is the report. Oversight Subcommittee put this on their website, press release, fresh out of the oven, says today the Committee on House Administration sent a letter to the DOD saying that they have factually been inaccurate in their reports. Now, after a thorough investigation, the subcommittee uncovered evidence substantiating that the DOD intentionally delayed the deployment of the DC National Guard on January 6th. And this is a point that is not brought up enough, and I'm so glad that it is. But Stephen Sun said they protected their families, but not the Capitol. So they knew how to deploy the National Guard, but they didn't do it to the Capitol. Why? Because they wanted it to happen. In addition, the DOD Inspector General, the person who is supposed to inspect this and write a fair and proper report for us, concealed the extent and cause of the delay to protect the DOD and the Pentagon leadership. The subcommittee found multiple instances where the DOD failed to disclose evidence that contradicted the DOD's erroneous conclusion. The DOD's report didn't talk about that. Reflects an alarming failure to adequately evaluate the actions of senior DOD officials. Says my subcommittee looked into this. Now there's this never before seen footage from HBO. Apparently we've not seen this before, showing the Secretary of the Army's false statements to congressional leadership. At 3:18, Secretary McCarthy tells sheltering members of Congress he is not blocking deployment of the National Guard. While referencing the DC National Guard, he says, "We have the green light, we're moving." However, the Secretary of the Army's own timeline indicates that the DC National Guard did not physically leave the armory until 5 p.m. All right. So Kev says at 3:18, "We got the green light, send them in." No, they wait until 5 p.m. They wanted it to happen. Okay. They were filming it, waiting for it. It was all an op. The DOD was saying, "Why don't you go check on my wife first?" Given the DC National Guard's history of success, supporting both federal government and responding to civil unrest, that's why they're there, and the significant role of the Guard, it's essential that the Inspector General's report, which is fake, accurately reflects objective facts so we can identify serious problems of abuse. You have not done that now. In March of 2021, National Guard Major General William Walker testified before Congress that the Guard's response to the Capitol was delayed by senior DOD officials. Who could that be? In April of this year, Colonel Earl Matthews, Major General Walker's legal advisor, and others testified before Congress that the Secretary of the Army, Ryan McCarthy, was not in communication with the Guard, and their response to the Capitol was most certainly delayed by the Army. These key personnel were intentionally not included as witnesses by the DOD. Didn't want to talk to them, okay, because they'll expose it. The subcommittee is deeply concerned that they didn't even interview these witnesses who would have given a contradictory report to your conclusions. So you just interviewed the people you wanted to talk to, and you're completely biased as a result. So here is what the letter to this Inspector General, Robert Storch, says. They say, "All right, listen, Inspector General, it was your job to go through and investigate this appropriately." They say the committee is tasked with investigating what happened at the Capitol. As you know, on November 16, 2021, the DOD Inspector General wrote a report. This report was the final report of the DOD Inspector General, so the Department of Defense, Milley and them, and their review into the events and how the DOD responded with the National Guard. While the subcommittee appreciates your crucial review of the records, the report left many unanswered questions situations. And they wrote that report pretty quickly, right? January 6th was January 6th. They wrote the report in November. Given the DC National Guard's history of having success in these situations, we need to identify these problems. So how come they couldn't respond to this time? And we've identified numerous flaws and inaccuracies in your report. They write, after a thorough examination of emails and documents, letters, memos, agreements, plans, reports, and more, we also had closed-door testimony. We have concluded that the Department of Defense intentionally delayed the deployment of the DC National Guard to the Capitol on January 6. Furthermore, the subcommittee also maintains that the DOD Inspector General knowingly concealed the extent of the delay in constructing a narrative that's favorable to the DOD and to the Pentagon. They went as fast as they could. They were racing. It was chaos. In March of 2021, the DC National Guard Walker testified, saying, yeah, it was delayed by the Army. One of the most damaging claims that we saw are quotes that are attributed to non-senior Army individuals. They claimed that Major General Walker's March 2021 testimony were mischaracterized, contradicting, and not true. They say, as you know, a witness who lies to Congress can be convicted of perjury, and so publishing these comments without any substantiating evidence was negligent and reckless. The claim that one of the things that Major Walker said was that the National Guard had all their equipment on their trucks, that's not an accurate statement, they said. And so we need more information about all these. You publish these statements as part of the historical record. They tell us that your report concludes, you said in your report where you said they did everything great, that the DOD's actions to prepare for and respond to the protests were appropriate and that were supported by the requirements and that they were reasonable in light of the circumstances. However, the subcommittee disagrees with you on those things. Here are what we want to be investigated more fully. Why did Secretary McCarthy's failures to communicate the Secretary of Defense's order to the commander? We need more information about this. Why did he fail it? Why didn't they immediately deploy forces to the Capitol at 3:04? Why did it take until 5 o'clock, 2 hours? We want more information about the failure of the Secretary to communicate to the commander between 2 and 4 p.m., which is when the riot was happening. The report states that calls took place despite both parties stating under oath that the calls never took place. Why did you say that they did in your report when they said that they didn't? Failure to review the purpose and the significant delay incurred for the development was neither requested nor utilized, and nobody's ever looked into this. You also found that the DC National Guard was not prepared for civil disturbance. But that's ridiculous because Secretary McCarthy recently got comprehensive briefings on their capabilities, and they were even doing rehearsals for civil disturbances. So the fact that you, as the Inspector General, could not adequately review these things and other DOD actions informs our opinion and our finding, wow, that the DOD Inspector General is complicit in intentionally concealing the Department of Defense actions to delay the National Guard response on January 6th. Wow. The Inspector General is as corrupt as the DOD. Shocking. Now, the subcommittee appreciates the important work of Inspector Generals, and in particular, you guys are great. And so for that reason, we have worked with you guys in good faith. We want additional materials on this. Now, in comments provided to the subcommittee in response to a discrepancy, the DOD IG responded with, they said, quote, well, you have a problem with our report. They said, well, as a fundamental matter, it is neither unreasonable nor unusual that witnesses to particular events involving stressful, fast-paced, multifaceted activities. That's what they always say. Hey, how come your stories don't align with themselves? How come, like, you said you were here at this time, but you were really over here, which means you're a liar and that your credibility is shot and the rest of your testimony against this defendant should be thrown out? How come they can get away with this by saying it's just stressful rather than being called liars? They may recall, they say, but not others, so people can't recall. In response to another discrepancy, they said, well, the description of the circumstances document the frenetic pace under which the Secretary and his immediate staff were operating. Obviously, they were not operating at a frenetic pace because it took 2 hours to get the guard out. As a result, we're not surprised by their lack of memory and their uncertainty. They say, what? That's it? That's your take? Inventing a critical phone call between the Secretary and the General in the absence of any evidence violates everything. Yeah, you can misremember certain things like times or specifics like what did they look like and things, but you just made up a phone call to say that they were responding to this when they weren't. A report that includes bias and incomplete statements to favor the DOD and the Army while disparaging the National Guard fails to represent the Inspector General's philosophy of being unbiased and independent. Therefore, the committee says in Congress, we are left with no choice but to reject your report and request that you formally publish a correction on behalf of the 10,400 congressional staff members and 535 members of Congress who put on gas masks and ran from the Capitol building patrolling, while the DC National Guard sat on buses waiting less than 2 miles from the Capitol because of a lack of communication from Secretary McCarthy. Yeah, right. Can we get off the bus to go? Nope, you're good, just right there. We need him to do some more damage. On June 4th, the subcommittee reached out to the Council of the Inspector Generals about integrity problems, saying it's wholly appropriate to take down what is wrong and replace it. So you're allowed to do this. You can fix your report. And so Congress is requesting a full correction to this report, saying that we're committed to continuing our good faith working relationship with you, but you can't lie about what you've done. Sincerely, Barry Loudermilk. And here's the video that they're saying is new material that is showing us some of these conversations.
Of our staff locked up and barricaded in their offices, so there's a critical situation and a risk of loss of life.
We have some senators who are still in their hideaway. They need massive personnel now. Can you get the Maryland National Guard to come too?
We can't. Mr. Secretary, obviously Prince George's County, I will call Angela Alsobrook, the county executive. I'm sure she'll deploy whatever we need deployed. Montgomery County as well, Fairfax and Arlington all have very significant forces.
Yes, sir. I'm going to call the governor when I get off.
Good.
All right.
Who does she think she is?
Thank you.
Everybody else has their mask on.
I have something to say, Mr. Secretary. Well, I'm going to call the mayor of Washington,
And now
D.C.
she's talking,
right
too.
now and see what other outreach she has to other police departments, as Senate Leader Hoyer has mentioned. And also that we can deliver the good news that you are now going to, instead of blocking the National Guard, that you will...
So there's more people in the Senate.
No, I just had to get permission. It's not my
Who was blocking the National Guard? What'd she say? Somebody's blocking the National Guard? Who was that?
I had to talk to my boss.
And then did you talk to your boss? So we...
I did, yes, we have the green light.
Okay.
Talked to me. I didn't have the information. I don't know how that word got out, but I never said that.
Thank you. Keep working. We need all the personnel we can get before someone gets hurt.
I'll play bad.
You mean before they shoot and kill Ashley Babbitt? Is that what you're talking about? Now, when you ask them questions about this, when you say, where are you guys so we can have some oversight over our intelligence agencies, they don't even show up. There was supposed to be a hearing that took place today between the FBI Director Wray and Alejandro Mayorkas, Homeland Security, and they snubbed the Senate. And the Democrats are in control of the Senate. They're not snubbing Republicans, they're snubbing Democrats. This is how out of control our own agencies are. It's not like Mike Johnson is causing a ruckus and they're going to stamp their feet on it and say, well, this is ridiculous, which is also ridiculous because Congress is a co-equal branch of government. But they both snubbed them. This was on schedule. They already RSVP'd. Homeland Security Secretary and FBI Director Wray did not show up to provide testimony to a routine hearing scheduled on Thursday. It's the first time in 15 years that the agency heads have refused to appear publicly for the annual hearing. 15 years. They don't care. Senator Gary Peters, who represents Michigan, said Secretary Mayorkas and their refusal and Director Wray's refusal to speak publicly about their departments and their efforts to address threats to our nation robs Americans of critical information. The American people deserve transparency and accountability, we like those words, on these issues. Said in a shocking departure from the Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee's long-standing tradition of transparency and oversight, for the first time in more than 15 years, our corrupt FBI and Homeland have refused to appear before the committee. Their choice not to provide public testimony about their department's efforts to address these critical threats America faces is bad. Americans deserve transparent public answers about the threats we face. Mayorkas and Wray's refusal to speak about this flout the committee's efforts to conduct responsible oversight and will deal a serious blow to trust in our government. Their claims that they can only relay such information in response to questions in a classified setting are entirely without merit. It cannot be the practice of the executive branch to deny the public critical information and disregard Congress's constitutionally recognized right to conduct oversight. I urge Mayorkas and Wray to honor the commitments they made to appear publicly at this hearing and to ensure that both Congress and we the people have the opportunity to hear directly about their agencies and how they're working to protect our national security. And that comes from Gary Peters. He's a senator from Michigan. So the intelligence agencies are not only snubbing the Republicans, they're also snubbing the Democrats because they're actually in charge. An FBI spokesperson said in a statement that the agency's leaders, they said, we've already testified extensively in public settings about the current threat environment environment, okay? And we believe the committee would benefit from a classified setting. The testimony would have been nice to hear, but they're just gonna run and hide for the last 2 months because they're pathetic. They're not even doing their jobs. And I cannot wait until Trump comes in January and we get some real oversight over these executive agencies, because it's detestable for them to snub their nose at all of America repeatedly. Johnson says Wray and Mayorkas refused to testify in public, claiming the threats facing America are so grave they can only be discussed in classified settings. If that's true, they need to acknowledge that the Biden-Harris administration is responsible for these grave dangers because of their open border policies. And we have Hawley saying this is Mayorkas and Wray giving the middle finger to the American people. Two of them, both of them. They are required by law to testify, and now they're saying it's good enough to post something on the website? Both of them are unfit for office. The Senate should subpoena them immediately and hold them in contempt.